CDs, are they meant to sound like that? Why do they sound like that? Let's have a look at what they sound like and see if we can see what's what. This is what a CD looks like. They come in various colours, mostly gold and silver. It's got various colours. You can see the rainbow there. That's the effect of etching the disc. Mass-produced CDs are pressed in the same way as records used to be. And one of the good things about CDs is they take up hardly any space. CDs have a really wide dynamic range. The signal-to-noise ratio on a CD is in the range of 96 dB. There are some with slightly higher when they do some various things to it, but a standard one will have around about 96 dB dynamic range signal-to-noise ratio. So from the quietest bit, so you turn the amplifier up until it just about hear the hiss of the CD player, to the loudest sound it can produce, is 96 dB, which is near enough the threshold of pain. In fact, I think it's gone past the point where it's damaging your ears. So it's loud, very loud. And anybody who's done that has had to try and rescue their speakers. Right, now, having said that, how loud is 96 dB? For the sake of easy math, we're going with 90 dB, which is 1 billion. And if you add the 6 dB to it, that makes it 3 times that. So it's roughly 3 billion. That's 3 billion times louder than a pin dropping. That is an enormous chunk of sound. Remember, vinyl's only 100,000 times, tape is 1 million times, and now we've got CD, which is 1 billion times and a bit. You've also got yourself a nice set of frequencies, 20 Hz to 20 kilohertz. Now it cuts off at just over, fraction over 20 kilohertz, so they specify as 20 to 20. The reason for that is simple. That's the range of human hearing. Doing the digital stuff, and by the way they actually chop up the signal, which I'm not going to go into here specifically, but the way they do it, you get just a fraction over 20 kilohertz true reproduction. Wow and flutter, because it's actually digital and because it's being read by a laser going into a buffer and then coming out the correct speed, there is no wow and flutter. It is, well, somebody will say there is, but it's normally listed as unmeasurable or 0.0000 something or other, just to placate the people who think, well, there must be. So any wow and flutter you hear on a CD playback is either intentional or there's something very wrong with your CD player. And it's as simple as that. And why do people complain that CDs don't sound right? They don't sound as good as vinyl, or they don't sound as good as tape. Well, let's have a look at that and we'll see where we go from there. The signal-to-noise ratio on a record is around about 50 dB. The signal-to-noise ratio on a cassette deck is around about 60 to 70 dB. We'll go with 60 for now. The signal-to-noise ratio on a CD is 96. There are other sound formats in between those, like for instance reel-to-reel. And bearing in mind reel-to-reel is what they normally produce, well certainly the old records were produced on reel-to-reels, then be assured that reel-to-reel is better than cassette. Hard to say whether it's as good as CD, but it probably is when you get onto professional stuff. They can make reel-to-reel be as good as they want it to be. They just run it faster and make the tracks wider. That's another story. Anyway, the thing with CDs is it's digital. Now what that means is it's either on or off, ones and zeros. Where that works for sound is that it means you can actually take a recording, you can feed it into an analog to digital converter, and that will then feed out as a set of numbers which the recorder will record. Now, it sounds barbaric, I suppose, or crude, or too sophisticated, but when you think about it, when you're recording on a tape, you're doing exactly the same thing, really. You're taking the electronic signal in, you're messing it around, you're adding it to a bias frequency, and then you're basically blasting it onto a strip of very small magnets. And then when you replay it through dragging a magnetic pickup over the very small magnets. So that's where the hiss comes from. That's fairly dramatic. To actually convert it to a set of numbers, which then you playback by playing back the numbers, and that converts it back to the original sum, which is the sound. Not a lot of difference really. Not really a lot of difference, except for the fact that you've got the beauty of it is 96 dB. We've looked at the figures for 96 dB. Do you realise how loud that actually is? Well, it doesn't sound very much louder than 70 or 60. It doesn't sound very much louder than 50. But that's because it is so much louder that we've had to reduce the numbers down and use what's called the logarithmic scale. That's why it's in decibels. But if we take the figure that we've just been looking at and then think about it, that is huge. So there we are. We're looking at now this thing that's got over 1 billion, that's 1,000 million spaces to put sound. You can have 1,000 million pin drops. That's an awful lot of sound. And when you compare that to the cassette, which has only got 1 million, so it's 1,000 times bigger than a cassette in terms of how much sound you can put on it. And when you compare that to the vinyl, again, this is a chart to scale showing the difference between vinyl and tape signal noise ratio. Look at that. And what follows is a chart showing the comparison between those two and CD. I couldn't get them on the same chart, and here it is. The figures are in there, and there are 2 lines on there, but look, it's had to go to scientific notation. There is no reason why you can't put an undoctored master of a vinyl record straight onto CD without any distortion and without any clipping and everything else, and it will sound exactly the same as the vinyl original, only without the cracks and pops. But there will be the original hiss that was on the original master if it was mastered in an analog way, if you take it from a pure vinyl disc or whatever. If you take a tape master which has been generated correctly, that will fit straight on, no problem at all, because you've got lots of space. And this is where the problem came with CDs. If I was reading about George Martin's son, and he was saying about how they felt restricted, because you got to remember, when they were working in studios and things, sound engineers were hearing these beautiful sounds, they're having to squeeze them down and put them onto tapes and onto records. They couldn't be as loud as the loudest bits, they couldn't be as quiet as the quietest bits. So you had to make sure that everything was hearable. So they had to boost the quiet sounds, and they had to squash the big sounds, and that produced a nice, fairly compact sound. Not as squashed as the Noise Wars and all that sort of thing does, but where the dynamic range is being reduced so that the loudest bit isn't too jarring and the quietest bit isn't too quiet. And that's where the difference is between that and CDs. Because when they started mastering for CDs, they were delighted by the ability to have the sound of a pin drop and the sound of a jackhammer on the same recording without having to alter the levels. It could just take it. That's why CDs sound the way they do, because people master them, and they master them to sound the way they want them to sound, which is not necessarily the same as if you've got a classic Beatles track and you've put it from a record onto a CD, a recordable CD, it will sound exactly the same. But if you go and buy the remastered version of something, it will have been mastered for the format that it's on, which means that the louder bits on CD will be louder and the quieter bits on CD will be quieter. They used to like to hear the breathing, then they didn't. It's just the way things are. So CD, lossless, very good, not its fault that it sounds different to vinyl and sounds different to. It's not because it's digital as such, as in it's not the digital that makes the sound different, it's because it's digital that people make it sound different. Anyway, that's it. If you got something from this, maybe you'd like to subscribe to the channel. If you've got any experiences that you'd like to add, then please put them in the comments. It's more of a community, and there should be an interesting video there, or there, or there. Well, anyway, that's it. Thanks a lot. Catch you another time. Bye-bye.